Welcome to the Artsy Raven, a show about writing, publishing, and the arts. With your host, the award-winning writer, editor, and publisher, J.F. Gerard.
Welcome to another episode of the Artsy Raven. Today, our special guest is Fartumo Kusow. So, Fartumo is a Somali Canadian novelist, educator, and public advocate on gender-based violence. She is the author of Tale of a Boon's Wife and the forthcoming novel Winter of My Spring, a literary exploration of girls kidnapped and forced into child marriage and what happens after they return home. Through We Speak Media and the Sahra Bulle Foundation, Kusow leads public education initiatives on survivor justice and social silence. She also hosts two podcasts, Break the Silence, Build a Future, and My Mother, The Person and the Patient, using storytelling as a tool for public accountability and repair. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So can you tell me a little bit about your background?
I was born in Somalia, East Africa, and we had a civil war start in late 1990, early 1991. And my family and I immigrated to Canada, and we arrived to Canada February of 1991. And we lived in Toronto for the first 3 years of our time in Canada, and then Toronto just became too big and too difficult to manage with all the limitations we had. So we moved to Windsor, Ontario in 1994, and we have lived there ever since. I graduated at the University of Windsor with Bachelor of English Language and Literature and a minor in biology. And then I went on and got my Bachelor's of Education, and I have been teaching English for Greater Essex County District School Board for the last 26 years.
Oh, wow. So are you still a teacher like right now? Are you? Yeah?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'll try not to ask you too many embarrassing questions or your students
No,
might
that's
listen.
okay. Yeah, that's okay.
All right. Now, how's your experience as being an educator and public advocate? Has that influenced how you write?
That influenced how I write because I feel like my influence comes with my pen, so I can say and create and manage the world that that seems unmanageable outside my pages within my pages.
Okay. Now, you do a lot of things. Like you also have two podcasts. Um,
I
like
have two podcasts. One of them was born from I was a caregiver, my mother, who was also a fantastic storyteller. My mother couldn't read or write, like a lot of people in her generations, and she just passed this past February in her 90s, and she lived with Alzheimer's that progressively got worse from you know 2011 until her passing 2026. So I was her primary caregiver. She lived with me before she got sick, and I kept her at home until she passed. So I found at some point I found myself focused on my mother as the person living with Alzheimer's, with limitations, with challenges, my inability to get care, the troubles I faced if I don't have somebody coming into the house as I'm getting ready to go to work and all that. So I was only looking at my mother, the person who was sick. And at some point, my mother and I were driving somewhere, and she asked me, "Hey, that's my cousin's house. Can we stop by?" And I just said, "Mom, your cousin lives in Somalia. We're in Canada." And she looked at me with all the seriousness in her eyes. She said, "Are you beginning to forget?" And she was the one who was forgetting, living with Alzheimer's. And then I laughed at the time, but later on I thought I was in fact forgetting too. Was forgetting who my mother was as the person before she was diagnosed. So I went back and retold the stories my mother told me, and I was able to create about 45 episodes called My Mother, the Person, and the Patient. So the first half of the episode, I talk about the challenges of caregiving and living with Alzheimer's. And then the second half, I retell the stories she had told to show who she was, the person. And the second podcast was born my tragic loss of my daughter, who was killed by her husband of 18 years in 2023. And I felt like I was silent in the understanding that I was protecting my daughter's privacy. And I felt not only my silence, but the system's silence contributed to not only my daughter, but what happens to women that are in a difficult relationship. We consider it to be private matter behind closed doors. So I decided I was going to break that silence and talk about. So I interview experts, survivors, and sometimes I tell my own personal story. So I publish an episode every Wednesday.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, and I hope people will look up the podcast. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, yeah, I've been to similar situations being a caregiver and well, one of my best friends was murdered last year by her
Oh dear.
spouse, and it was like, well, and then like, you see people make comments. Like I'm on this chat group where people are just commenting about abused women, and they were just like, "Well, why don't they just leave?"
Exact.
Sometimes it's
Yeah.
not easy. Like there's so many ties. There's children. There's
Yeah.
all
In my
sorts of
last
things.
in my last episode, which was just published this Wednesday, I actually talked about, spoke, interviewed a lawyer in UK who also is a domestic violence survivor, and we talked about that topic. How just why don't you just leave might seem a supportive statement. It's really not, because it's not that easy and that straightforward. Like you said, there's financial connections, children, the person leaving might be dependent on this person for their survival, for financial support. So just leave is not really a solution that we think it is.
Oh gosh. All right. Now, what was your initial inspiration for Winter of My Spring?
So 2014, there were girls, Chipok, a tribe called Chipok in Nigeria. About 200 schoolgirls were kidnapped from their school. They were in a boarding school. So overnight, this radical group called Boko Haram came, and they took roughly about somewhere between 150 to 200 girls out of their schools and just disappeared with them. And the world just went, a world was outraged. Anybody from Michelle Obama to Angelina Jolie, Malala, anybody who was anybody was talking about that kidnapping. And there was this hashtag at the time in Twitter, what we know now as an X, that was that started trending, and the hashtag was "Bring Back Our Girls." And everybody talked about, and it was trending and getting more and more views for people who were using. And I remember thinking, oh, if we could speak those girls, because I found that the voices of the real victims, the girls, how they felt, what their experience like, and who was more responsible for this trouble that they were in, the community, the kidnappers. Then I thought, um, their voices were missing. So I just um, thought, what would happen if those girls could speak to us? Because that kidnapping, even though might be on a smaller scale, it happens a lot of other countries. The harming of girls, using girls as the tool of war, and the consequencing other people. So I was born in Somalia, so I understand it happens in Somalia, and I'm aware of it. So I decided I was going to create these fictionalized, real story, but fictionalized, where three girls that are 12 and 13 are kidnapped, and see what they would tell us about their experience in their own voices. And the story doesn't only end in the kidnapping, it also goes through after the girls escape and come back into their communities. How are they treated within that community? So that's where the idea of the novel comes from.
Now, did you know anyone that had a kidnapped girl back in the news
Um,
story?
yeah, I don't know somebody specific, but I hear the stories of 5 girls are kidnapped from this village and only one came back, and 4 are kidnapped and nobody came back, and 6 are kidnapped and one of them died and 4 came back. So that stories I hear it all the time because I'm from a small town in Somalia, and it happens usually from smaller towns where people don't have access to a lot of resources.
Okay. Now, how do you approach writing like such a traumatic experience?
So I consider myself to be a storyteller by birth, right?
Mhm.
So I like to tell stories. And I wrote my first fictionalized story when I was 14 and published it at 16. But I I use writing as part of my daily activity rather than something that I'm thinking about publishing or doing that. So I remember when I came to Canada, my goal was to start writing and learning the language because I didn't speak English when I came to Canada and all that. But as somebody who's immigrant might know that life just got in the way. We had to rebuild. We had to learn the language. Whatever skills and careers we had back home, both my husband then and I were lost. So we had to start over again. So life got in the way. And then at 2011, about um, almost 20 years when after I came to the country, I realized there will never really be the perfect time for me to write. So I
Mhm.
just have to create the time to write. So I instituted and I apply that to this day. I will write 1 hour a day, no matter where I am.
Mhm.
And that 1 hour can be 20 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the afternoon, another 20 minutes, 10 minutes in the evening, but it will be 60 minutes counted. So I decided to calculate the input, not necessarily the outcome.
Mhm.
And I would just put that hour in. And when I'm writing scenes that are really traumatic and challenging, that especially scenes that I know happened to a girls or a woman like me, when I write about context in what I said my stories, I would write Saturday mornings because I don't have to rush to work and I can take my time, and it gets really too heavy, I can log off and take a walk for 20 minutes. So all the scenes that are violent against the girls are written on on Saturdays, at least on the first draft. And I made a deal with my editor to say that if you're sending those scenes back, don't send it in the middle of the week for me to edit. So she would usually send it on either Thursday or Friday, and we made a deal that I won't open those emails until Saturday morning. She'll just send me a note saying that, oh, just you can open this anytime or open this Saturday. This is for Saturday morning. So I had to protect my peace that way because these are scenes that I could really relate to, even though they're fictionalized.
Okay. Now, what was the most challenging part about writing this book?
Um, Most challenging part about writing this book is writing things that are really real.
Mhm.
And I know it's real and I know they happen. And I don't know if not knowing if me writing it is ever going to amount to anything or help people that need it or become a voice for those people that need it that don't have the voice.
Mhm. Okay. Now, what do you hope readers understand differently after reading this book?
I want the readers to understand differently that this is really not us versus them. This is a human story. And this is what happens when the systems decide to ignore those that need it the most. When we don't account for those that need us the most. When we say this only happens to those people over there, even though I have these characters and these events and stories written in different contexts with based in different cultures. I don't want the readers to feel like it's 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 just happiness there, because it happens here, in Ontario where we are. It happens in the 401, where young girls and especially those that are in a vulnerable situation are trafficked into people, for the most part, that were supposed to be the people that protected them. So I think it's to see that, um, we have to stand up and protect and show that women's bodies, need to be safe in the home and in the street and at workplace and at school and within their communities. Also, I want to be able to see, because the characters in this story are Muslim. um, some of them call themselves Muslim and the others are practicing Muslim. But the idea is that this is not a story about Islam. So, whether you are a Muslim or not, or different faith, or don't practice any faiths, if we accept the faith or the text that contains that faith, even if we consider that text to be perfect text, but we have to accept it's practiced by flawed human beings with their own motivations and limitations and desires, to use text like any other tool, a way to gain what they want or meet their own needs.
I mean, yeah, that sounds very universal of any religion, really. I don't think it's
Yes,
just
yes,
Muslim, right?
yes.
Um, okay. Now, talking a little bit about how when you came to Canada, like, do you find, because now you're in Canada and you're looking back, do you see things a little bit more clear as you're writing this book, like the differences and like the discrimination the girls are facing, or?
Yes, I see clearer. I see it clearer now, for several reasons. Number one, I noticed, like, I see what the challenges that happen to women and girls on on two levels. Number one, now I didn't feel for the longest time I belonged to myself, so I had to get myself to a place where I felt I belonged, even if somebody else feels like I didn't belong. So that was the first one. And the second one is, I realized that how, no matter where you are, how pervasive this whole idea of the violence against women and girls reaches. And it's not really. So I had to get myself comfortable with the idea that if I write about context of a violence against women and girls in a place and a setting that's outside Canada or outside North America, then, but I'm presenting that story to an audience that is within North America, then I feel like capable of presenting that story in a way that is universal, without worrying about, I am labeling people that are already labeled different, further kind of like fracturing them. So I think that was my big worry for the longest time, that writing about that context, I am almost creating an idea of um, fracturing people or disenfranchising people that are already been disenfranchised.
Okay. Now, like you say, like when you write about trauma and violence, in a way, the writer does have a bit of a responsibility to not sort of turn it into a spectacle.
Mhm.
Um, worry about communities finding it difficult to read it and remember things, or do you think it's important to tell the story so people understand what is happening?
It's very important to tell the story of what's happening, people. But I think, like you said, as an author, I hold the huge responsibility in making sure I am not telling it to sensationalize, and I'm not telling it to tell it. I'm trying to tell it in a way that has a message. And that's why I almost always try to let the characters tell their story without me assuming it's my story. So anytime you hear in quite challenging scene, you hear it in the eyes of a 13-year-old. What kind of language would a 13-year-old show, and what kind of words would they use versus what I would use as an adult woman? So that those are the things that I worked on, and I am a firm believer that I am only holding the pen and allowing these characters to come through and tell their story. And the words they use and descriptions they use in a scene that's challenging will be used in the eyes of a 13-year-old, which will allow me not to go for the sensational part of what it feels like to be in captivity as a 13-year-old. Because how I would describe if I was captured and kidnapped and harmed like these girls are as an adult, it would be totally different language and different way of talking about it than a 13-year-old would talk about. So that's how I offer that respect to the readers, to give them a voice so people can see what happens. Because if we don't write about it, if we don't talk about it, then nobody would know, and we can all bury our heads in the sand and say, oh, everything is fine and the terrible things only happen to people out there. So that's how I approach in dealing with those scenes, and not to, even when I do presentations, not to pull out the parts of the book that are challenging. So I'm not using that as a way to pull readers in. And at the beginning of the book, I start with these girls, as you would see any other 13-year-olds across the globe, universally, talking back to their mothers and not listening and not following the rules and not doing their chores and complaining and wanting to leave home as soon as they can. So that's to show that these are just like any other teenagers that you would see, and they get you ready for that trouble that's going to come. And you will notice how that could be you or me in that age.
Okay. Now, after someone finishes your book, what message do you hope they take away from it?
If I can take one message away from it, is two messages actually. One is there is a hope, and also, um, the device, the weapon, the knife, whatever you want to call it, that harms one woman is in another woman's hand. To make sure that we have the the power to support each other, and there is no hero coming. We are each other's hero. As at the end of the book, the girls find other women, their hero within other women, and their support system within other women, and it's quite possible to do it. So I want to leave the reader with that. After all these troubles, we're not hopeless and we're not powerless to effect change.
Okay. Now, do you have any advice to give someone who is starting their first novel?
So I think two advices. Number one, I think, is to write for the sake of writing. Because when I write, I never know if this book will be published, if there's anybody that's interested, would be interested in this story. I write this story because this is a story inside me that needs to be written. So that is the first thing. And also, I would focus on what you are putting in rather than what comes out. So that's what I mean when I say just write for the sake of writing. And also, there is no perfect time to write, and there is no perfect way to write. So the biggest advice I can give somebody who's writing or trying to write, or in the middle of writing, is give your writing a time and a space. It doesn't matter how small it is, and commit to that. Commit to the fact that you are going to write half an hour a day, 40 minutes a day, an hour a day. And sometimes I sit in front of my computer and I could write nothing for that hour, but I don't leave. I don't go on my scrolling on my phone, or I don't go watching the TV. I just keep that hour there, whether I write one line, one scene, one chapter, or nothing. That hour is for writing. So giving your writing time for it to grow and room of its own, um, that for it to grow, um, so you can just get it in there. And the next thing is writing is always rewriting. So there is, so don't worry about what your first line is, what your first draft is. Don't think you're going to land on the scene you like to open the book from the first writing. This book, for example, had 4 drafts before I even was able to share it with anybody. And in parts, it went through 14 drafts, not whole, but changing this moving, that it went through 14 drafts before it hit the print.
Okay. Now, you're going to do a bit of a reading for us. Can you give us a bit of context and then you can start reading?
So I'm going to read the first chapter, and the first chapter gives you an idea of a looming difficulty, looming challenge, but also gives you the girls as they are as a 13-year-old girl. So that's the opening of the book. And that's where the chapter starts. So you meet the 3 girls, and 2 of them you get a little bit more description in this chapter. Then the third gets more description in chapter 2, but the chapter 1 we get their relationship with between them and between their parents, and something that's going on in the community at large that will grow into the story later on. But I want the readers in the beginning here, or the people who listen to your podcast, to meet the girls in their um in their environment as like any other 13-year-olds that you would meet.
Okay, sure.
So this is the opening of the books. At 13, I saw no enemy. I knew no fear. From the small town of Marca, where my family of 5 lived, the ancient port city in the southern region of Shabelle, the world lay before me on the other side of the Indian Ocean, visible from our kitchen rooftop. As I done every afternoon after my chores, I dug my toes between the wooden logs of the outer wall of our house, reached for my familiar spot on the clay rooftop, and whistled for my 2 best friends, Micah and Sarah, to join me. They came up right away. Sarah sat in the middle, Micah and I on either side of her. Did you hear? Micah spoke too loudly, and I shushed her. Did you hear the search was called off? She said a little quieter. What do you mean it was called off? I asked. 2 search parties had spent 4 weeks looking for Hussein family's 15-year-old twin daughters who went missing on their way back from the market a month ago. One group of men in our town, including my father, started to look for them at the first light of dawn. The other group took over after they prayed Dhuhr at midday, and they didn't finish till sunset when the call for Maghrib prayer could be heard from the ancient masjid. The elder told my stepfather the girls might have left on their own, Sarah said. His exact words were, how can we find them if they don't want to be found? Do you think your stepfather agrees with the elder? Micah asked. He was just relaying to my mother what the elder had said. Micah, do you think it's possible they went on their own? Leave on their own and go where? Go where indeed? The twins, like us, were born in Marca. Most families still resided in the small brick homes that lay below sea level, built hundreds of years ago. Those were the same homes occupied by our grandparents and great grandparents, going down generations. Very few of the people in this town went beyond the barriers of the Indian Ocean unless it was to buy and sell goods. They always went in groups. Legend had it that it wasn't safe for people to go alone. If they did leave on their own, I don't blame them, Sarah mumbled to herself as if Micah and I weren't supposed to hear. That's what I would like to do, she sighed one day. Why? I took another look at Sarah. My mother gets hysterical if the measuring cup is not where it's supposed to be, Sahra paused. And my stepfather? She let out a loud breath she must have been holding. He goes totally crazy if I even say a word. Sarah wiped her face. Even if I'm just joking with my brothers, he goes into a rage. You don't plan on swimming to the other side, do you? Micah gave a nervous giggle. I'll find a way, Sarah said. I will. I can't stay away from this place. I scanned the landscape, resting my gaze on the minaret of the ancient masjid, marveling at how my ancestors had been able to create such splendor more than 400 years ago. Look at how beautiful it is. I planned to see the world outside Marca. My father had traveled the world and I wanted that for me. But this was home. I want to leave Marca, but I also want to come back. After that, Micah, Sarah, and I sat on the roof, quiet. At that, at that vantage point, with a backdrop of a swelling ocean, water moving gently like rolling hills and then erupting into massive waves, a truck entered my line of vision. Micah, Sarah, I pointed at the truck. It was blindingly white and nothing like the decrepit truck in our town. With glass windows, only on the driver's side, it reminded me of a vehicle our former communist government used to transport prisoners. I'd seen a truck like that in an old book my father owned. I followed the unfamiliar vehicle with my eyes until it disappeared behind the masjid. Have you seen it before? Micah, Sarah, and Micah both frowned. Maybe one of the fishermen brought a new truck. We crossed our legs and watched the red rays of the setting sun reflect over the clear blue ocean, the merging of light and water. Two lovers at the end of a long absence created golden silhouette that hugged the horizon. Rara, my mother called, looking up at me. What did I say about going up there? Her sharp tone pulled me out of my reverie. Micah and Sarah climbed down. They greeted my mother and took off running toward their homes. Why are you so upset? I peered at my mother, the familiar contours of her face, her hair carefully arranged, the dark locks braided with precision held strands together in a tight bun at the back of her head. She wore her hair like a crown, accentuating the graceful curve of her jawline. Wrapped around her bun was a sash, a colorful scarf, whose vibrant pattern added a burst of life to her appearance. The fabric seemed to dance with every moment, framing her face like a piece of art, but it was impossible for me to see her as colorful. I watched her in seconds move from a simple question to exploding with rage. I was sick of those extremes. You don't listen, she said, gritting her teeth. She was right. I didn't listen to her unreasonable request. What's the problem with sitting on the roof? I'm not leaving the house, and I do listen, but I don't understand. There are eyes watching and ears listening twice as much. Her voice had become a shriek. My mother was almost a foot shorter than my father, who was 6 feet tall, and she was close to 40 pounds lighter than his 180 pounds. Yet she kept a sharp eye on anything or anyone who might intend to harm us. She was the opposite of my father, who was the best, who saw the best in others. According to my mother, she was different than he was because he stayed behind in Marca, waiting for him to come back after he had proposed. She was the one who endured the unwelcome glares from townspeople who believed it was misguided to wait for a man unlikely to return. She was the one who endured the unwelcome glares from the townspeople who believed it was misguided to wait for a man unlikely to return. Hoya, that doesn't even make sense. I climbed down from my perch. Even Allah doesn't ask us to blindly obey. She hated it when I brought a line to the mix. Look, worship Allah and be kind to your mother, she said, using another part of the scripture to make her point. Not listening leads to problems, especially for girls. My mother often complained that I thrived in excitement, the desire to bend the rules, if not totally break them. But after the Hussein twins went missing, she began to view me as completely reckless. Rara, my mother said again, if I can't keep you off that roof, how can I keep you out of other trouble? Her back straight, she exhaled loudly. My mother loved me. I knew she did by the way she worked tirelessly, spending hours sewing dresses of my favorite style at night after her chores. When we were alone, she would read aloud my father's love letters, mimicking his voice and laughing. She'd explain so often her fear of his not coming back for her, no matter how many times he'd promised in those letters he would. These were glimpses into my mother's life as a girl in love and willing to take a chance on something she believed in. Now, she went overboard in her desire to protect me. The way she watched me, her eyes on me constantly, no matter what I did, irritated me. The slightest infraction on my part, and she was screaming. It was as if she were waiting to catch me in the wrong so she could yell. Why was she so fixated on me and not my brothers? All 9 and all 8 were younger than I was and made one mess after another, yet their mistakes never registered on her radar. You don't understand what you're doing. A mistake pushed my sister out of Marca at 15, my mother said. What mistake? I asked. That's not the point. This was not the first time I'd asked about my aunt. My mother always gave that exact answer. But what was so wrong with being like Nadine? I wondered. The beautiful scarf she'd sent me as a gift from the capital made me envy of all the girls in town. I never understood why Aunt Nadine had been so ostracized. I'm not Aunt Nadine, I said. I know that. My mother placed her fingers under my chin and lifted my face to meet hers. Rara, you must listen. This is very important, especially now. My brothers and I were at the kitchen table doing schoolwork when my father returned from work that night carrying his sack with knives he used to clean fish at his shop. He entered the kitchen, my mother right behind him. He set down the sack on the knee-high cement table in the back of the kitchen. Rara, your mother told me you're not listening. I put down the copy of the Quran I was reading. I went on the roof to be with my friends and watch the water after I finished my chores. I am in the house. Why does it bother her so much when I go on the roof? He turned to my mother. Alia, the child isn't going outside the house? My father was more sensitive to my desire to know something of life beyond Marka. He'd left on his 17th birthday and returned 4 years later to marry my mother. But he also returned to take care of his dying father and deal with the fishing business he'd inherited. He'd intended to sell everything and move to the capital, but my mother had refused to leave Marca. This was the first time I could remember his ever questioning her approach. You always take her side, my mother yelled. That's why she doesn't listen. Seriously? It wasn't enough that she was on me every second of the day, constantly complaining, mentioning what I had done wrong, never what I'd done right, not one single time. Even in my recitation of the Quran, she'd focus on the one word I'd mispronounced or the one verse I didn't recite perfectly. Now she wanted to turn my father against me. I wish I had someplace else to go. I hate this house. I hate living here. I hate all your stupid rules. I stomped out of the kitchen, leaving my parents staring at each other. My father followed me to my bedroom. Rara, he sat next to me on the bed. Look at me. I turned around reluctantly. I knew what he was going to say. Your mother loves you. If this is love, what's hate? I asked and meant it. Love was supposed to be gentle, like the way my father's voice soothed me when he led us through prayer. The way his clasped hand comforted me when I ran to him crying. Even the times he chastised me, his words never made me cry, and my mind didn't question his motives. This is her way of protecting you. He took my hand, and his scarred skin felt rough from cuts and nicks of his knives, protecting me from what I need protection from her. You know your mother loves you. He stroked my hair. That's why you have to listen to her. If I could never hear her say another word, I would be happy. You don't mean that, he said, and I noticed a glint of shock in his eyes. You love your mother. Indeed, I did love my mother, but I wouldn't admit to it then. Even hell would be better than here. My father flinched. Rara, stop. It's not all your mother's fault. You play a part in this too. You know, unless she changes her ways, there will be no peace between us. If you promise you will start listening, I'll ask your mother to give you some room to grow. I will. But I knew my mother would never change her ways. The only solution was for me to leave home as soon as I could. The Muaddim's call from the masjid quelled the tension in our house. It's time for prayer, my father said. I followed him to the prayer room. He stood in front of us on the mat. Allahu Akbar, he called. Allahu Akbar, we repeated after him. So that's the end of chapter 1.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me.
The Artsy Raven is produced by Dark Helix Press. Introduction voiceover by Chris Gorman. Music by Tim Moore. Please access your bonus content on the Patreon website. Thank you very much for listening, and please stay safe.